Divided world leaders have been addressing a wide range of crises at the United Nations General Assembly. From climate change to the need for a two-state solution between Israel and Palestine. The 76th Assembly is also expected to widen the scope of issues raised by delegations to include racism and the deadly COVID-19 pandemic. For the first time since the COVID-19 pandemic began, more than 24 world leaders appeared in person at the UN General Assembly on the opening day of their annual high-level meeting. Perhaps the harshest assessment of the current global crisis came from UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres, who opened his State of the World address, sounding the alarm that the world must wake up. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said that the pandemic is a reminder that the entire world is part of a big family. In his address to the UN General Assembly, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan raised his voice for the people who are unheard. Our infographic has the key takeaways. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan delivered a speech to the UN General Assembly on Tuesday, reiterating his country's commitment to a range of global issues, from making COVID-19 vaccines available to all and the fight against terrorism.
Karşı karşıya kaldığımız zorluklara rağmen daha adil bir dünyanın mümkün olduğuna dair inancımızı tekrarlamak istiyorum.
On Tuesday, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan addressed the 76th United Nations General Assembly, where he started a speech with the issue of the coronavirus pandemic, a global health issue which the president said had exposed the injustice of the modern world.
Dünya genelindeki can kaybının yüksekliğinde küresel sistemin artık çözüm yerine sorun çıkaran, sorunları derinleştiren, sorunları çözümsüzlüğe mahkum eden çarpık yapısının da payı bulunuyor.
Calling vaccine nationalism a disgrace to humanity, the Turkish leader said that his country would continue its contribution in helping poorer nations fight against the pandemic.
Bu vesileyle yerli aşımız Türkovak'ı yakın zamanda milletimizle birlikte tüm insanlığın istifadesine sunacağımızı buradan ifade etmek istiyorum.
Moving on to the regional security issue, President Erdogan began talking about the latest situation in Afghanistan. He said the Afghan people had been abandoned by the world to their fate.
Ülkede bir an önce barış, istikrar ve güvenliğin tesis edilerek Afgan halkının huzura kavuşmasını temenni ediyoruz. Türkiye olarak bu zor günlerinde Afgan halkına karşı kardeşlik görevimizi yerine getirmeyi sürdüreceğiz.
Underlining Turkey's importance in its role in hosting millions of Syrian refugees, Erdogan blasted the West for supporting terror outfits in Syria, urging them not to differentiate one terror group from another.
DAEŞ'la göğüs göğüse çarpışan ve bu terör örgütünü ezimete uğratan tek NATO müttefikiyiz. Yine sahadaki varlığımızla PKK terör örgütünün Suriye'deki uzantılarının işlediği katliam ve etnik temizlik faaliyetlerinin önüne biz geçtik.
The Turkish leader went on to say that Israeli atrocities against the Palestinian people remains the most important issue in need of being addressed in the region.
Filistin halkına yönelik zulüm sürdükçe Orta Doğu'nun kalıcı barış ve istikrara kavuşması mümkün değildir. Bunun için işgal, ilhak ve yasa dışı yerleşim politikalarına mutlaka ve derhal son verilmelidir.
At his speech, President Erdogan became a voice for the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus.
Birleşmiş Milletler'in eşit olarak kabul ettiği adadaki iki halktan birinin lideri sizlere hitap edebilirken diğer liderin bu platformda sesini duyuramaması adil değildir. Çözüm için adanın asli unsuru olan Kıbrıs Türk halkının egemen eşitliğinin ve eşit uluslararası statüsünün tescil edilmesi gerekiyor.
The Turkish president also called on Mediterranean countries to solve issues in the region in the framework of good neighborliness and dialogue.
Doğu Akdeniz'de en uzun kıyıya sahip Türkiye'yi bölgede yok sayan anlayıştan vazgeçilmesi şarttır. Diyalog ve işbirliği için bölgedeki tüm aktörlerin yer alacağı Doğu Akdeniz Konferansı düzenlenmesi, bu öneri hala masadadır.
President Erdogan ended his speech by discussing one of the biggest problems facing the world, the climate crisis.
Her fırsatta dile getirdiğimiz dünya 5'ten büyüktür tespitini iklim değişikliği hususunda da tekrarlıyorum. Tabiata, havamıza, suyumuza, toprağımıza, yeryüzüne kim en çok zararı verdiyse, doğal kaynakları kim vahşice sömürdüyse, iklim değişikliğiyle mücadeleye en büyük katkıyı da onlar yapmalıdır.
I'm now joined live from New York, from the edge of the UN General Assembly by A News broadcast coordinator Orhan Salih. Orhan, so pleased you're able to join us here today on the edge, and I can see that you're outside the Turkish House in New York. First of all, we've just been watching the speech from Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Can you tell us how was his speech received, and did the delegates warm to his idea of the world becoming a fairer place under the auspices of the United Nations?
Yes, Andy. President Erdogan had made a strong speech yesterday at the United Nations General Assembly. He talked regarding the inequality of the rights of the world. For example, he talked regarding Afghanistan, regarding Middle East, Syria. Lots of topics were discussed, and the world leaders reacted very positively to Erdogan's speech in New York. And one of the main topic was yesterday Afghanistan. What is going to happen next in Afghanistan? Who is going to take care of the people of Afghanistan, because they are in need right now? And President Erdogan especially underlined the importance of the help to Afghanistan, because after United States pull out from Afghanistan, the country is in need, and someone have to take care. And especially he sent some messages regarding the refugees, regarding the immigrants that are coming from Afghanistan to Turkey and to different parts of the world. So Erdogan also underlined in the speech that Turkey is no more capable to host more refugees or immigrants coming from Afghanistan or from any place of the world. So Erdogan underlined that there must be a plan. Or there must be a plan for the refugees, especially coming from Afghanistan. They have to be replaced in another country or in their own country, because after Taliban take over the control of Afghanistan, lots of Western aid organizations that's left the country of Afghanistan. And now also Erdogan make some strong messages, had sent some strong messages regarding Syria. What is going to happen in Syria next? Turkey and the world is no more capable to see 10 more years war in Syria. So there must be a solution for Syria as well, because Syria is a neighboring country to Turkey, and Turkey faces lots of problems, conflicts coming from Syria, especially from Daesh terror organization, from PKK terror organization. They have to be stopped. And Erdogan also underlined that Turkey is the only and the strongest country of NATO who is fighting against the Daesh terror organization. And Turkey is also fighting for the Syrian people, for their lives against PKK. And one of the other strong messages coming from Turkey is Mediterranean Sea. Turkey is underlying that we are in presence in East Mediterranean, and we are going to be continue. The Turkey is going to be continue there because last year, especially Greece and France had made some had sent some strong messages against Turkey that Turkey don't have anything to do in the Eastern Mediterranean place of the sea. So Turkey insists that we are here and we are going to be continue to stay in East Mediterranean Sea. One of the other strong message is Erdogan. Again, he underlines that world is bigger than five. So the United Nations have to be renewed. They have to make some new rules regarding the special United Nations Security Council, Andy.
And that includes a call to remove the veto, of course. Was that message, which, of course, he's promoted through the book that he's sharing with all the delegates, was that message of a reform for the United Nations well received? And will steps be taken, do you think, to begin to slowly make changes to the United Nations?
Yes, and that's one important topic to the reforms of United Nations. But unfortunately, till today, Erdogan had made lots of speeches here, just here next to the Turkish house, where the headquarters of United Nations is, that United Nations have to change because the body of United Nations is not working right now. United Nations is not getting any result from any conflict in the world. So the reform must be urgent and must be right now. Erdogan insists for that for many years, and in his book, he also distributed here to so many world leaders about his book. He sent message that the reform must be urgent and it must be immediately, because the world needs these reforms. Otherwise, the conflicts, the wars are going to continue in Afghanistan, in Syria, in Yemen, in Northern Africa, in Latin America, in other Asian parts of countries, etc. Unfortunately, till today, the United Nations didn't give any solution, didn't give any peace to the world. And that is coming from the body of the United Nations. Unfortunately, these five permanent countries are not, giving any solutions. They are just gathering in this hall and talking, and there is no any result from this talk. So these have to be changed immediately, not just for Turkey, for the people of the world. Erdogan is insisting. Erdogan is saying this. Erdogan is sending this message to all the leaders here in New York, Andy.
It's a very important message, and let's hope that they think on it and take action. Now, I want to ask you, last year the United Nations General Assembly was totally different because of the pandemic. Compared with previous years before the pandemic, how have the COVID-19 protocols affected this year's assembly?
Yes, exactly. Regarding the COVID-19, the coronavirus, last year there was no any United Nations meeting here. This year the United Nations General Assembly gathered, but with a very limited people here. The press is not allowed to work inside the building. We are, as you see, we are just outside the building in the streets. We are working. We are making lives from here. And on the other hand, there are lots of leaders here in New York right now. And this week is going to they are going to continue to make their speeches here in the General Assembly. But when we compare with the previous years, of course, it's less than the previous years. The leaders are. Some of the leaders were sending their messages through video conference system. So regarding this coronavirus, there are so many things that are right now going on here. The security is very high right now here. And even the coronavirus, the Turkish President Erdogan, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, had made lots of bilateral meetings here, just behind me, in this new building, the Turkish House. Ukrainian President, British Prime Minister, Georgian Prime Minister, lots of presidents, prime ministers were here in the last 3 days. They met with President Erdogan. They had discussed some very important topics here in this building. It is just opposite the United Nations General Assembly, the headquarters. And as we previously announced, it was inaugurated 2 days ago with a ceremony attended by General Secretary Antonio Guterres and other leaders as well in this building. And this building is going to operate for the Turkish mission, diplomatic mission in New York, just here in the center, in the heart of the diplomacy, Andy.
So this is, we've been talking about the Turkish House for the last few days since the inauguration, and it's good to see you standing outside. This isn't just a meeting place, it's a cultural centre as well. What is the role of Turkish House in New York, in fact, for America? Is this a true bridge between Turkey and the United States to enable Turkey to deliver its message and its diplomacy more effectively?
Yes, Andy, that's an important point. This house is not just a connection between Turkey and the United States, it's also a connection between Turkey and the world, because all the world countries are representatives are here in Manhattan. So this building is going to host these meetings, these connections between Turkey and the world. And of course, since it is in United States, in New York, the other diplomacy meetings and other things are going to be held here. Also, other missions of Turkey will be here in this building. This is a very huge building. It is around 171 meters high. It is one of the tallest buildings in this area. Since there are lots of places, also the General Consulate of Turkey in New York will start operations here in this building as well. And also there will be some delegations from northern Turkish Cyprus as well here in this building, and they are going to be represented as well here, Andy.
So this is a great opportunity for Turkey to showcase how it has changed over the years and into the future. Well, what else is in store for President Erdogan in the final hours of his visit in New York?
Yes, today is the fourth day of the meetings since Recep Tayyip Erdogan came to New York. And today there are lots of bilateral meetings as well. In a couple of hours, the Libyan delegation will be here. And also the Albanian Prime Minister was in this building just a few minutes ago. And also Erdogan is going to meet, and he also met with other representatives of NGOs, of the Society of United States, the Society of Turkish Society in New York, etc. He have a really busy schedule here in New York, and the schedule is continue. About 2 hours later, Erdogan is going to meet with the Turkish media here in this building. And after this meeting, there will be other bilateral meetings as well. And we are waiting approximately at New York time at 7 p.m. He is going to leave New York to Istanbul.
Well, I just hope the whole trip has been a great success. Orhan Saleh, thank you so much for joining us today on The Edge from New York. Thank you. Now, several days of speeches from heads of state and government began on Tuesday as the general debate of the 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly began.
The 76th session of the annual United Nations General Assembly kicked off on Tuesday. Unlike last year, when many of the contributions to the general debates took the form of speeches sent by video, numerous leaders have flown to New York, although with far smaller delegations than before the pandemic. The UN Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres, reprimanded the world for the inequitable distribution of COVID-19 vaccines.
A majority of the wealthier world vaccinated, over 90% of Africans still waiting for the first dose. This is a moral indictment of the state of our world. It is an obscenity. We passed the science test, but we are getting an F in ethics.
Meanwhile, Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro, who is a vaccine skeptic, this time told the Assembly that he supported the vaccines and defended the use of an early treatment against COVID-19.
Seguindo recomendação do nosso Conselho Federal de Medicina. Eu mesmo fui desses que fez tratamento inicial. Respeitamos a relação médico-paciente na decisão da medicação a ser utilizada e no seu uso off-label.
US President Joe Biden mapped out a new era of vigorous competition without Cold War in his first United Nations address, promising restraint from the US military.
We are not seeking a new Cold War or a world divided into rigid blocks. The United States is ready to work with any nation that steps up and pursues peaceful resolution to shared challenges, even if we have intense disagreements in other areas, because we'll all suffer the consequences of our failure if we do not come together to address the urgent threats like COVID-19 and climate change, or enduring threats like nuclear proliferation.
Biden added that he remained committed to peacefully resolving a dispute with Iran over its nuclear program.
The United States remains committed to preventing Iran from gaining a nuclear weapon. We're working with the P5+1 to engage Iran diplomatically and to seek a return to JCPOA. We're prepared to return to full compliance if Iran does the same.
In response, Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi said that Tehran wanted the complete removal of US sanctions.
از کاپیتال تا کابل یک پیام به جهان مخابره می شود و آن نظام سلطه امریکا بی اعتبار است چه در داخل و چه در خارج. تحریم بخصوص تحریم دارو در دوران کرونا جنایت علیه بشریت است.
Chinese leader Xi Jinping, on the other hand, stressed Beijing's peaceful intentions in international relations.
中华民族传承和追求的是和平、和睦、和谐理念。我们过去没有，今后也不会侵略、欺负他人，不会称王称霸。中国始终是世界和平的建设者，全球发展的贡献者。 国际秩序的维护者，公共产品的提供者，将继续以中国的新发展为世界提供新机遇。
And I'm joined live from Birmingham in England by Scott Lucas, who's Professor of American Studies at the University of Birmingham, and live from Sofia in Bulgaria by Ruslan Trad, who's a security analyst. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us again here today on The Edge. Pleasure to see you. First of all, Scott, let's come to you. Scott, What's your general take so far from this year's 76th edition of the United Nations General Assembly?
Well, I think there are two contrasting visions. I think one vision is that the UN Secretary General set out, which is that there are transnational issues, critical transnational issues, such as the coronavirus pandemic, such as the climate change, that must be addressed by all national leaders. And that must be addressed by national leaders in a spirit of cooperation. But the challenge, critical challenge today, and it's the same as it has been for many years, but it has been heightened by the scale of these issues that face us, is that many of the national leaders are operating off of a national agenda and not a transnational one. So, for example, these national leaders might profess the idea of cooperating to deal with these challenges, but they do so to distract from division and repression at home. These national leaders might talk about the need to avoid conflict, but in the same speech, talk about the need, but you have to do something about this enemy that we're facing. It is okay for national leaders to reflect national interest, but what will matter much more than these speeches, and in celebrating any one particular national leader for a wonderful speech, will be what goes on behind the scenes. Mm-hmm. At the end of this UN General Assembly, will we have a coherent working plan so that vaccines get to all peoples in all countries? Will we have the fulfillment of a commitment, not just to provide $100 billion by November for developing countries to have clean energy as well as economic progress, but a climate change initiative by all countries to reduce emissions? And will we have a step back from confrontation where someone can say, I have peace at home, but immediately says, I have to attack or I must confront this terrorist who is next door? Will we have that type of transnational approach after these speeches?
Good points. Ruslan, let's ask you a similar question. If we listen to all the speeches, we can take away that the world is in a total agreement over several issues and total disagreement in others. Well, what are you taking away from the UNGA so far?
Well, I took some notes, and I understand that these notes are nonsense right now, because we are hearing again and again some statement without any acknowledgement of what's happening on the ground. I mean, first of all, the world is divided, and this is very, very visible in this General Assembly. We listen very small talks about the current conflicts around the world. Yes, the climate change is very, very important topic, but these topics are nonsense for millions of people who are now fighting for their lives in many parts of the world. So I heard nothing, almost nothing for Syria, for Yemen, for other conflicts, including in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, in Sahel region. So for what purpose are these statements? I don't understand. Even I'm an analyst.
Right. Well, those are the points that Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan was bringing up in his speech, that these issues need to be addressed, and the UN needs to be reformed in order to address them. But Scott, you make the point that it's behind the scenes that the real action is going to take place. Does the fact that this year there's been some easing and people have been able to meet face-to-face again after a couple of years, does this mean that some progress might be made from this assembly?
That depends on the terms of the conversation. If I meet you face-to-face merely to shake a finger at you or to say that I'm better than you, that doesn't make for effective diplomacy. And I think, to follow up on what Ruslan's saying, beyond these important transnational issues, what we have are various arenas in the world, but arenas where millions of people are suffering that become playgrounds when you have certain discussions. It's all well and good to say that you want to have a way of solving the Syria conflict. But when you then say this group is terrorist, that doesn't solve the Syria conflict. That doesn't give us a way out of that. It's all well and good to say that we want to improve conditions for a country such as Yemen, which has now had years of division. But what are you going to do to support the United Nations, who has been trying to get a ceasefire from all groups? In recent weeks, we have had these conflicts that you and I can talk about, including Israel and Palestine. Yet the headlines have been of new military pacts, Chinese military operations, a U.S. military pact with Australia and the UK, and yes, countries in the region, in the Gulf states, and talk about the military necessity to confront someone. That's the problem. Nice words are one thing, but actually getting to concrete ways of protecting civilians and managing conflict, that's far more important than a token statement about the 5 permanent members, because the problem isn't just with them, it's with everyone.
Absolutely, and they need to speak honestly with each other and put aside the ambition to hit each other. But Ruslan, you said, I think you'd agree that climate change is an important issue that maybe underpins many of the problems, for example, immigration, hunger, which of course is a cause of immigration in itself. What is the key issue that for you that the UNGA really needs to pin down over these few days?
For me, the main problem of the meeting and the statements at all is I see hidden messages between the lines of these statements. And actually, the countries are acting not united, as I said before, but everyone with its own agenda, which is very dangerous in these times. I mean, climate change and fighting hunger and the global issues is only possible when we act as united body. This means we are so naive to say that, because if we take lessons from the past years, this is currently nonsense. The current General Assembly should speak more about conflicts, in my opinion, because people are directly affected by these geopolitical events. I should remind that just before a few hours, one of the main aides of the Ukrainian president was attacked near Kiev. So in the same time, we have offensive in Yemen. We have regional issues in Mali between France and Russia. How these issues will be resoluted? I don't see any decisions in that way by the world leaders. They just state my country, etc., etc. But I don't feel any kind of resolutions of the main problems, the current problems, not after 10 or 20 years. Every decade is important, not only ours.
And that's a point that Joe Biden made, that this is a decade which will make or break the future. Scott, what is needed then to make the United Nations actually united and not an oxymoron?
At the end of the day, the United Nations is not a supranational body that can solve everything. It has very effective agencies on the ground. It has very effective agencies for education, for health, for conflict management, but you need a commitment from communities and nations. And I think the starting point is this. We need to get back to rules and norms, not just for other people's behavior, but for our own. There are rules and norms in terms of a social responsibility for providing for health in a pandemic. There are rules and norms for providing for immigrants and refugees who have been displaced. There are rules and norms for the protection of civilians who are under threat sometimes from other governments and sometimes for their own. We are in a current phase where many countries are retreating from those responsibilities. That instead of actually getting back to when the UN was founded in 1945, to talk about a universal set of human rights that apply to all, human rights are being denied within countries, even as leaders profess that they care about others. And human rights are being denied in conflict zones because leaders are thumping their chest and saying at the end of the day, it is a win-lose situation, rather than the idea that there could somehow be a win-win, including, most importantly, for the civilians who are affected in these areas.
So, Russell, is there hope for the future? This is the way nations have been for millennia, that first of all you protect your own stamping ground and then look outside and maybe in past years try and conquer that and make it your empire. Can the United Nations be made to function? Can something positive come from these meetings, which next year there'll be the 77th UN General Assembly? This will carry on year, or is this just a talking shop?
Sorry, is that for me?
That is for Russell.
I should say something short about that. The whole meeting is happening and should be reminded again that this meeting happened on the background of very huge crisis provoked with participants of United Nations staff in Syria and other places. We had just before a few days, United Nations staff helped Syrian regime to bring people with trucks like animals. So who will be responsible for that? So this assembly should at least request some kind of general reform of this organization, because for people, and including for my
I think we're losing. Unfortunately, we're losing your sound. Thank you so much for joining us. Scott, let me just come to you for the final question. One of the countries which is top of the agenda is, of course, Afghanistan, and the Taliban have requested that they be recognised in the United Nations, and yet they're not officially recognised. They say that the representative of Afghanistan, who I believe will speak on Monday next week, is no longer representative, the Taliban say, of Afghanistan. What is the resolution for this, do you think?
Oh, I think the resolution for Afghanistan, when you've had decades of conflict, is not whether this guy or that guy, and it won't be a woman, of course, if it's the Taliban, gets to speak at the UN General Assembly. I think that you have to have a resolution within Afghanistan itself. We do not even have a clearly effective operating Taliban administration yet. It's still being put in place. And we have to see what that type of administration does regarding the needs, the aspirations of the Afghan people. If the Taliban operates as it did in the 1990s, where it closes down political and social space for many of its people, where it implements a radical Islam that actually keeps many people indoors and does not provide education or health or jobs for many of them, then they do not meet the standard that those are rules and norms that should be universal for everyone. So no, the Taliban have gone into Kabul with the strength of arms, but the strength of arms does not constitute what is needed to get diplomatic recognition. And so, no, Afghanistan is an issue which, after this week in the General Assembly has come and gone, will have to be determined on the ground, first and foremost with a regard what happens for those Afghans who have been left behind by so many countries recently.
Absolutely. Scott, thank you so much for joining us, and also to Ruslan Trad for joining us here today on The Edge. Our analysts have provided their insights on this year's UN General Assembly. Let's have a roundup of what they had to say. The world leaders at the UN General Assembly sounded the alarm over vaccine shortages and how the COVID-19 pandemic has threatened economic recovery and widened inequality across the globe. The climate crisis was also among the topics addressed during the speeches, as UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres said that the world must wake up and restore trust.